the boy who could command them. The city of Oakhaven was a skeletal remains of its former glory, its marble white pillars now stained with the soot of a decaying empire. For most, the dawn brought only the bitter smell of cold hearths and the dread of the coming occupation. But for Ty, a 10-year-old orphan who slept in the rafters of a ruined cathedral, the dawn brought the silver watch. At first, he thought they were tricks of the light, shimmering, translucent figures standing perfectly still against the crumbling walls. They wore the heavy, notched plate armor of the old legion, their faces obscured by the shadows of their great helms. They never spoke, they never moved, except for when Sai walked past, as he navigated the debris-strewn streets to find scraps of bread. The spectral soldiers would shift, slowly, with the sound of grinding stone that only Tisai could hear. They would sink to one knee, lowering their tattered banners as he passed. The peace of the ruins ended when the Iron Sun Empire arrived. Their steam-powered war machines thundered across the bridges, and their soldiers, clad in black handgold, moved like a locust swarm through the districts. Sai found himself cornered in the great square. The invaders' commander, a man with a scarred face and a heart of flint, raised his sword to strike the street rat aside. "Kill the boy and clear the path," the commander roared. Sai closed his eyes, his small hands trembling, and let out a desperate, guttural cry for help. "Please, stop them." The air didn't just turn cold, it froze. From every alleyway, every sewer grate, and every shadow-drenched doorway, the silver watch surged. They didn't just appear, they ignited. Thousands of spectral warriors, glowing with a fierce, cold mercury light, formed a wall of impenetrable steel around the boy. Terrified, but fueled by a sudden, surging heat in his veins, Sai pointed his finger at the black and gold ranks. "Go," he screamed. The spirits moved like a tidal wave of light. The Iron Sun soldiers fired their muskets and cannons, but the balls passed through the spectral legionaries as if they were mist. The ghosts, however, struck with the weight of cold iron. The invaders broke. They fled in a screaming panic, chased by an army that did not breathe, did not tire, and, most terrifyingly, could not die twice. By midday, the city was free. The remaining citizens crawled from their cellars, weeping and cheering, hailing Kazai as the scion of hope, the miraculous boy who had summoned the heroes of old to save the empire. That night, the healers took Sai into the palace to treat the small scrapes he'd sustained. As they washed the grime from his back, a silence fell over the room, a silence heavier than the graves of the fallen. Between the boy's shoulder blades was a birthmark, or perhaps a scar, in the shape of a jagged, coiled serpent devouring its own tail. It was the sigil of the eternal sovereign, the mark of Emperor Kalen the Cruel, the tyrant who had led the legion into a senseless, genocidal slaughter 5 centuries ago, before being executed by his own guard. Sai looked into a polished bronze mirror and saw the mark glowing with a faint, sickly violet light. Outside, in the palace courtyard, the spectral army stood in perfect, silent ranks. Sai stepped out onto the balcony, expecting to see the warmth and devotion of a saved people. Instead, he looked down into the hollow sockets of the soldiers' helmets. There was no love in their gaze. There was only a profound, agonizing wariness. They weren't kneeling out of respect for his innocence or his courage. They were kneeling because the magic of the sigil acted like a chain around their souls. They hated him. They remembered the frozen wastes he had marched them into. They remembered the families they had been forced to leave behind. But as Sai's hand twitched, 10,000 ghosts involuntarily snapped to attention, their weapons clattering in a rhythm of forced obedience. Sai realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't saved the city because he was a hero. He had reclaimed his property. The boy who could command them was merely the cage that kept the dead from their rest. The violet glow of the sigil felt like a brand of hot iron against Sai's spine. The adulation of the city below, the singing, the bells, the weeping mothers, sounded to his ears like the buzzing of flies. He looked down at his small, dirt-stained hands and wondered how many lives those same fingers had snuffed out in a previous life. As the moon climbed higher, the silence of the dead began to fray. Sai realized that he wasn't just hearing the grinding of their armor, he was hearing their thoughts. It wasn't a roar of voices, but a low, subterranean vibration, like the tectonic plates of history shifting. "Release us, Butcher," a voice rasped in the back of his mind. It was the centurion standing directly beneath the balcony, a man whose chest plate was caved in by a mace blow that should have ended his service centuries ago. Sai gripped the cold stone railing. "I didn't ask for this. I'm just Sai. You are the anchor," the voice returned, dripping with a cold, ethereal exhaustion. "The sigil is the knot. While you draw breath, we are the tethered dogs of your ambition. We felt your fear in the square, and it tasted like the old wine of your cruelty." The next morning, the liberator was brought before the remnants of the city council. They didn't see an orphan. They saw a weapon. They presented him with a miniature suit of gold-etched plate and a velvet cape. "The Iron Sun Empire is retreating to the border," the high priest said, his eyes glittering with a predatory hope. "With your legion, we could do more than defend. We could reclaim the lost provinces. We could forge the empire anew." Desai looked at the men. They were the same men who had ignored him when he was starving in the cathedral gutters. Now, they were eager to ride the coattails of a ghost king. He turned his gaze to the window. Outside, in the blazing heat of the noon sun, the Silver Watch stood. They didn't cast shadows. They were anomalies in the light, their presence causing the very air to shimmer with a nauseating distortion. They were suffering. The sunlight acted like a caustic wash against their spectral skin, yet they could not break formation. Because Tai was sitting in this room, they were bound to wait in the sun. Tai realized that the council intended to use him as a battery. They didn't care about the souls of the soldiers or the identity of the boy. They wanted the tyrant's power without the tyrant's face. "No," Sai said, his voice small but echoing with a strange, double-toned resonance. "Pardon, young savior," the priest asked, leaning in. "I won't march them," Sai said, standing up. The sigil on his back flared, and for a moment, his shadow on the floor grew 10 feet tall, crowned in jagged darkness. "They have fought enough. I have made them fight enough." The council's faces shifted from reverence to alarm. "You don't understand, boy. You are a ward of the state. Your power belongs to the people." Sai ran. He bolted from the council chamber, through the gilded halls, and out into the courtyard. The soldiers snapped their heads toward him in a terrifying, synchronized motion. He ran past the gates, past the cheering crowds who tried to touch his cape, and back toward the ruined cathedral where his life as a nobody had begun. He climbed the winding, broken stairs to the bell tower, the spectral army flowing through the streets below like a river of mercury, following him with mechanical precision. He reached the top and looked out over the city. He saw the beauty of the world and the rot of the power he held. He understood the twist of his fate. To be a hero, he had to destroy the very thing that made him powerful. "If I die," Sai thought, reaching out to the mind of the centurion, "the knot is untied." The silence that came back was profound. It wasn't a yes born of malice, but a yes born of hope. Sai looked at the sigil reflected in a shard of glass. He didn't jump. He didn't end it. Instead, he sat in the dust of the bell tower, and began to do something the tyrant never would have considered. He began to apologize. He spoke into the minds of the 10,000, acknowledging every scar, every lost home, every century of forced silence. He stayed there for days, refusing food, refusing the council, simply sitting with the dead. He used the power of the sigil not to command, but to listen, and slowly, the jagged edges of the brand on his back began to fade, turning from a mark of ownership into a scar of memory. The dead didn't vanish, but they changed. They sat, they leaned against the walls. For the first time in 500 years, they rested, not because the king was gone, but because the king had finally become a servant.